You might be a little disgruntled out there. I do know that it's 16 after 9 o'clock, but it's well worth the wait. Ohio State football talk right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Buckeye Claire Crawford. We are joined, of course, by the esteemed Steve Hellwagon, 247 Sports senior Big Ten writer for Bucknuts. How are we all doing tonight?
Couldn't be better if I were twins.
Couldn't be better. Very good. Very good. Good to hear. Steve, we will dive right into the talk. We know that a number of people have been waiting. My fault. Everybody blame me. My apologies. There somehow was some 2 links out there, and who knows what YouTube did to us tonight. But we are here. That's the important thing. Steve, you were in Buckeye camp talking to a number of coaches and players. Run it down for us and let us know what you found out.
Yeah, today was actually a great day to go over to the Woody Hayes Center and touch base with Coach Day. We had not had an interview with him since the spring game, and there were a lot of good headlines that came out of that. I can scroll through some of those. Plus, we got all 4 of the coordinators, which would be Jeff Hafley and Greg Madison on defense, and Mike Yursich and Kevin Wilson on the offensive side. And they all had a lot to talk about as well. One of the impetuses for this, and Claire and I were talking about it off camera a moment ago, was that Coach Day and his wife announced that they had started an initiative with Nationwide Children's Hospital to raise money to support treatment of for mental health for children, basically children who may need some type of mental health treatment, and that this was something very near and dear to the coach's heart. So as the release that came out said, Coach Day openly discussed the fact that his father committed suicide when he was a child. So that is kind of a trauma that he lives with, and kind of led him today, he and his wife, to start this initiative, which that began his remarks, and there was a lot of coverage about that. I'm sure it will be discussed on the 11 p.m. news here in Columbus tonight. So that was something that kind of transcends the game of football and important to the head coach, and certainly was interesting. A lot of talk in terms of football. It was kind of a juxtaposition. As soon as he finished his comments about that, the questions about football kind of came right in left and right, although there was more discussion about that as well as his 30-minute session continued. But in terms of the quarterback position, he made it pretty clear that Gunnar Hoke, the transfer from Kentucky, will be given every chance to get some reps with the first team and a chance to win the job, which was kind of interesting because everyone has assumed that Justin Fields has this job locked up. But I think Coach Day is either one of 2 things, trying to motivate the bonus baby Fields, who was the number 2 overall prospect last year, signing with Georgia and then transferring to Ohio State, either trying to motivate him, or he's got some serious concerns about what's happening at the quarterback position. So who knows which it is. When we talked to Mike Yursich about it, he said that they vetted Gunnar Hoke a whole lot in terms of what he did at Kentucky, and obviously liked what they saw there, and that he fits the Ohio State offense as well. Yeah. So I felt that to be kind of interesting. I guess I'll have to go through and sift through and come out with some other hot topics that occurred today, but those were some of the big things. Ohio State, and I'll just finish on this one, continue discussing things. There's a lot of hand kvetching about the defensive recruiting, and on one hand, they just signed the top wide receiver in the country, or at least got a commitment from him, Julian Fleming from Pennsylvania. Got the top kicker in the country from Cincinnati Princeton this past week as well. And yet there's a lot of unhappy people that they only have one commitment still, LeJon Cavazos on the defensive side. And Coach Day was asked about it, and he said, well, this month of June will be very important. They're having a camp tomorrow, another one on the 15th, and visits with various prospects throughout the month, and that by the end of the month of June, they're hoping that some things come into focus. So I'll stop talking now. Just kind of I got the ball rolling a little bit, But I will look for some. I've got a couple of notes here. I'll look for some other key headlines that kind of came out of what was discussed today.
I'll agree with Steve, even shortly on the fact I always love conspiracy theories. So I'm not the one to poo-poo the idea that the coaches would, pit players against each other. And the only reason that I have reservations about that being the case is that Gunnar Hoke is the real deal. And we heard Mike Yurcich wax poetic about him. And like you said, how well he fits into the Buckeye system. I don't know if they deserve Oscars, but it definitely seemed like they were very high on Gunnar Hoke. So competition breeds success, and we're happy to have both of them at Ohio State. But it'll definitely be interesting to see how that position battle ends up weighing out. And I hope that by defensive recruiting, when he says, the month of June is really important to us, I hope that's not the version of the checks in the mail. I really hope that they really have some really promising recruits on deck for us.
I got to think that they do. Certainly, we've got, about 6 weeks away from a point in the season in which the information and the hype and the rhetoric, and then finally the guys on the field for practice will come down like an avalanche about mid-July. We're in that lull right now. So as we contemplate all of this, Claire, what has been most on your mind over the last few weeks? I know you brought a few things to mind before we started to record last week, and then we just took off on so many things we didn't get to them. But what has you mulling Ohio State football during the off season?
I'm really curious, more curious than anything else. And we kind of touched on it a little bit last week about the O-line play and how that's going to evolve this year. Let's hope it's evolve and not devolve because there's a lot of promise to this offensive line, but promises are not guarantees. And I'm really kind of interested to see what there seems to right now be what appears to be a lack of depth, a little bit of shuffling. I have the most excitement, and I have for quite some time. And my buddy Joe Dexter will remember how excited I am about Josh Myers. He's probably the one I'm most excited to see what he's going to be able to do at center. But if things don't improve in the run blocking department on that offensive line, I don't know that Strauss' seat is going to be hot. Rather warmish might be a better indicator here. But, obviously he's got deep ties to Urban when he was hired under Urban. And he's got national championships under his belt at LSU. But I want to say between 05 and 14, he had one offensive lineman drafted at LSU. And again, he's had these offensive lines at Ohio State nominated for big awards, and he's doing well with Urban's recruits. So I'm excited to see, again, hopefully there's an evolution and this offensive line doesn't devolve.
Claire, did I hear that correctly? Between 2005 and 2014, LSU had one offensive lineman drafted?
Yep.
Wow, that's a bit stunning.
Right. It doesn't seem right.
Steve, what are you working on there for us?
Well, I just jotted down a couple things, and that is interesting that you mentioned about Coach Stud. He probably had more guys drafted this past year than his entire time at LSU. Yeah, kind of interesting. I know one of the things we gleaned today was that Thayer Munford on the offensive line is starting to get closer to full activity if he's not all the way back, and that Coach Day has a very strong hope for the offensive line along the lines of what Claire was talking about there, that although there are changes and truly just one returning starter from last season with Thayer Munford, the hope that Wyatt Davis, who played a little bit at the end of the season, Brandon Bowen, who played previously, Jonah Jackson, who's probably transferring in as a guard from Rutgers, and as she mentioned, Josh Myers at center, that the overall five-man unit will not have too much drop-off and or even be maybe by the end of the season even better than what we saw at the end of last season. So I think that is kind of interesting, although I thought at times last year they were – I think they went through that lull in games probably 4 through 8 where they couldn't run the ball, and then by the end of the season, they with Mike Weber getting some tougher yards, they were doing a little better with it. But Coach Day was asked about the summer program and what it looks like. The players attend some summer classes, obviously, to get ahead on their academics because the fall can be very strenuous for them. They are basically they work 8 hours a week with the strength class in terms of our strength coach with the staff with lifting and running. They'll lift as position groups, as offense, defense, upperclassmen, freshmen. Then they kind of vary things around. They're also heavy into running this summer. But the big thing that Coach Day is looking for is leadership, is guys within each group that are going to lead their group during these workouts, and that this is the time that those team bonds are built. They were happy with the testing, said that the 40 times were outstanding. He was asked for any specifics about that and declined. So he's keeping those numbers under wraps, but somehow they always find a way to leak out. I think those guys who run those really fast 40s are not averse to putting that out there on social media that I'm a 4.3 guy, and God bless them, because that is a tremendous thing. If you're able to go 4.4 better, or even low 4.4 better, that's awesome. So those were some of the things from Coach Day that I gleaned. They had Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator, there, and he was big talking about how Damon Arnett, maybe he did take some lumps last season at the cornerback position, but it seems like he's done everything they've asked him to do, and that he is really coming on. They want Jeffrey Okuda to be more physical, win the battles at the line of scrimmage. That'll help him. Sean Wade has really only been a corner since Hafley's been there, hasn't played much at safety. So those three guys are your corners, it appears. Jordan Fuller is very close to coming back at the safety position. You have Brendan White and Jason Wint, who had an outstanding spring, it seems. Those would probably be the top three guys at the safety position, maybe Isaiah Pryor as well. So those were some of the top storylines, I think, that came from Day and Hafley. I'll continue to mine for a little bit more gold here as we're going through. It was, to explain how this all happens, you get a half hour with Coach Day in the meeting room, then you go out into the practice facility, and two of the coaches are already sitting there talking to the media. So it's kind of like you have to decide which direction you're going to go. Am I going to go talk to Wilson, or am I going to go talk to Hafley, or whatever? And then when they're wrapping up, they bring out Coach Yursich, and then Coach Madison came out toward the end as well. So you don't necessarily get time with all four of them individually, but we did collect all the audio and everything, so we'll be going through it here in the next day or two. But everything that I heard today just kind of reiterates, and this is something Coach Day joked about. I hope the offseason is good and pleasant, because that adversity really hits in the fall.
I'm going to warn both of you, we're going to be on a bit of a roller coaster ride. So it started with Steve mentioning Ryan Day's initial comments that are very serious off the playing field in regards to his childhood and what he had to deal with his father, and then how that's affected him and motivated him, and now his charity work. And then we dove into football, and we're going to bring some fun back into it a little bit later when we start talking historical games and wins and losses and so forth that we remember. But since this was brought to my attention a number of times at the end of our conversation last week, and I didn't get a chance to get to it, but other people are commenting and wanting us to comment on the Dr. Strauss report, Michael Drake, his tenure at Ohio State, the sexual abuse case involving 177 students during a 20-year span. And Steve, since you're on campus on a regular basis, this not being directly football related, I didn't really look that much into it other than the surface reports and what most people had discovered, and just, again, reading the headlines and the quick sound bites and the stories that came out. But just your thoughts about being around the program and how that's affected the program and what's been stated there.
Well, Mark and Claire, I think, and I'm sure Claire will have plenty because she's living here as well in Columbus, and she knows full well the story. And we both know athletes who were impacted probably and affected by this from that time. But essentially, this is Dr. Richard Strauss, who was a team physician at Ohio State and did physicals plus as well as assessments on injured athletes and these type of things for a number of years. He was probably involved in athletics from the 70s through the 90s through various athletic directors, Hugh Hindman, up through Rick Bay and Jim Jones, and even probably on to Andy Geiger. So this transcended a lot of athletic directors, a lot of coaches. He was involved with football players, wrestlers, any number of athletes from different sports. And there was always kind of an undercurrent of that what he was doing wasn't necessarily on the up and up. There were comments that were kind of on the undercurrent that maybe some things weren't right. And I come to find out now that there have been, the university made a release last week that there were over 170 documented athletes who believed that they'd been abused at the hands of Dr. Strauss, who coincidentally committed suicide about 15 or 20 years ago. So he's not around like Larry Nassar, the physician at Michigan State, who was put on trial for everything that he did as a national team gymnastics doctor, as well as a team physician at Michigan State. He went on trial. There is no one to put on trial for a criminal proceeding, but the university is acknowledging at least a little bit of culpability for what happened on, quote, their watch years ago, when, again, so many people who were employed there previously were coaches and trainers and the athletic department support staff. So in some ways, this is a bag of crap, for lack of a better term. I always go back to that line that was dropped in Michael Drake's lap here a year or two ago. And he's doing the best, in my mind, that he can do to maneuver through it. I think that there are people on one side who said that he admitted too much. He left them open to exposure, to lawsuits. There are people on the other side who are friends of these supposed victims and the victims themselves who say his comments didn't go far enough. So my guess is there'll be litigation that comes down in the years ahead as these people will seek relief for pain and suffering and trauma that occurred. And it's going to be a difficult time. This is something that even touched Jim Jordan, a member of the House of Representatives, one of the ranking Republican members in the House. He was an assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State up through the early 1990s. And some of the wrestlers alleged that they told Jim Jordan that they had been mistreated by the doctor and that he didn't do anything about it. He's denied any wrongdoing. And there have also been people who've come out on his behalf to deny it. Well, here's the thing. Russ Hellickson was the head wrestling coach. If this should fall on anybody, it should fall on the people who were being paid to be the head coaches, the people who were in the athletic department administration at the time when all this was going on. And that to me is and again, athletes would go to their coaches and in some instances report what they thought was wrongdoing, and nothing was ever done about it until well after the fact. So I don't know. I kind of meandered around all different sides of this story, but it's something that's going to continue to percolate along the lines of the Nassar story at Michigan State for years to come at Ohio State. It's just something that is not going to go away. And yet nobody who's working there currently is personally liable or culpable for anything that happened. I mean, so it's just one of those unfortunate things in life that the institution is still there, the athletic department is still there, and now they're going to have to defend themselves, it seems, in some of these situations.
And I'll just add very briefly that Mike DeSabato, the guy that's really leading the charge, was very much involved in Ohio State athletics, specifically Ohio State wrestling. The whole DeSabato family has been with Ohio State wrestling for many, many decades. Mike has been known to champion other causes, including some that have to do with, what he calls abolishing amateurism and Ohio State and college athletics in general. So Mike has a very big megaphone, and he definitely stands up for people who he thinks are being either disenfranchised or their voices aren't being heard. Several of these, the newer allegations are, I think, of really, we can put that on Mike getting some of these testimonies to come out there. I will add one more thing, that predators, like Dr. Strauss, will oftentimes pick athletes and young men because of the stigma surrounding it. So just again, for anyone that's listening, and I know this is a rather serious topic, but it's just very important that you know that your voice can be heard no matter what position you're in. You know, your athletic career will not be compromised because you come out and you tell the world that you have been abused.
Well said. Well said.
Well said by both of you, as was stated here by Jesse Sullivan. So a number of people on the live chat are very appreciative of both of you stepping up and outlining the situation and what transpired and what we know. Jesse Sullivan in particular says, I genuinely appreciate Steve's viewpoint and opinion. He always words it so well. Yeah, it's an extremely sad situation. Our discussions, this is very rare, but at times blindsided by the cruelty, the cruelty and the brutality and the disgusting acts that often invade people's lives.
Well, and the other tragedy here is that oftentimes, because fan bases are so pitted against each other, they're out for blood for another team. You know, they're obviously championing one cause or another, and they would love to see, you know, Ohio State's athletic department get the death penalty. And in reality, we want victims to be heard. We want there's no price that anyone could pay that could give them their lives back or give them their innocence back. There's nothing that could be done that would be enough. And if that means the death penalty by the athletic department, then so be it. If that means that there's punishment for everyone involved, then so be it. But unfortunately, it's made to be a debate from people, almost like you know, partisan debate, to pick a political term, because Ohio State fans are so you know, we're rabid, we're fans, right? We're fanatics. So oftentimes it's viewed as we're going to defend our team or our state or program no matter what, when in reality, those of us who really care and who are very real understand that victims' voices need to be heard, and it's extremely important.
Thank you, Claire. Well stated. Steve, you as well. Cheryl Jensen commenting a number of times in the chat. Thank you, Cheryl, a big Buckeyes fan who has certainly, and rightfully so, taken this to heart. Again, these abuses against so many people. All right, you talk about a 180 turn. We're just going to take it right here. I don't know how well to do it. I am often, and I appreciate the compliments about the hosting and the direction I take in the conversations, but I don't have it in me to make a smooth transition or segue here. We're just going to dive into football, and we're going to take a step back into history. So, Steve, we did this a few weeks ago, so I apologize for dragging you back through it, but it's a fun topic, and Claire and I have discussed this. Maybe it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, but it's kind of my off-season list of historical conversations. So we'll start it right here with Ohio State football. And I will remind everyone that we just are not doing this right now this week. It's every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern time. So set your calendar to it. Invite your friends, your family, and your social media acquaintances that love not just Ohio State, but college football, because I know we've got a number of other fan bases represented in the live chat. All right, Claire, what are those wins that you have witnessed that still ring near and dear to your heart, that still bring a smile to your face when you remember back, that brought you so much joy in the moment, whether they are those championship winning games that everyone's going to remember, or just maybe had a personal connection with you and your family watching Ohio State football?
I have goosebumps already. I'm such a nerd about Ohio State football, but the 0-2 season, obviously it's easy to reference that really magical championship game. And I think, Mo Claret doesn't get enough now looking back, obviously, because of the life that, his experiences and what he had to go through in order to get to where he is today, which is a good place. His basically the equivalent of the bloody sock moment with his shoulder injuries during that game. It was pretty magical. My daughter was born that year, so that entire season, she was born October 9th, 2002. And if you're listening, that makes her 17 and me 21. And you're not supposed to laugh that hard, Steve. Yeah, so it was really special. The that Purdue game, that Purdue win in 0-2, has to be one of the most special Ohio State wins. Obviously, right around the time she was born, I was stuck in the house. I couldn't really go anywhere, but watch my Buckeyes. And if you didn't have an ulcer after that season, I'm pretty sure you weren't a true fan. But that Purdue win is pretty special. What Craig Krenzel did in that game really solidified his legacy at Ohio State.
And it was such a departure from what Jim Tressel was known for at the time. Okay, you've got plenty of time. It's fourth down. You're down 6-3. Tressel ball. What are you going to do? Well, you're gonna find a running back in the backfield to give it to and rely on that offensive line, and you're going to try to pound ahead for you're going to get 2 yards any way you possibly can to keep this thing going. Nope. Let's go with the high risk, high reward pass to Michael Jenkins, and it was beautifully thrown, perfectly thrown, right over his shoulder. And of course, Ohio State brought home a gut wrenching 10-6 win on the road, and they actually had to hold off. I guess it would have been Curtis Painter at the time playing quarterback. Curtis Painter. It was one of those. He played in the NFL. A couple of quarterbacks after Drew Brees made it into the league, and I think it was Curtis Painter at that time. I'll have to look this up. Who took a few shots to the end zone against Ohio State's defense, and it was it was a narrow one and one of many, as you mentioned, Claire.
Definitely, those are some of my favorites. Again, it's easy enough to point to the championship wins, but some of those that I think the Penn State victory is one of my favorites, where I don't know if you've seen the chart for that game in 2017 or 2018. No, it's 2017, where Penn State their winning percentage is creeping up to 100%, and the chart just plummets at the very last second, and the Buckeyes come away with the victory. I had actually, just because of where I was at the time, I had been watching on my phone at work, and I couldn't finish the end of the game. I was listening to Big Daddy Paul Keels on the radio. So that was the best absolute way for me to finish listening to that game and taking in that experience.
It's been quite a series with Penn State, Steve. Obviously, the last two have been as exciting. I can't imagine that in any way the game in Columbus this year can top the last two. But Ohio State owns a pretty fair margin of victory against Penn State since the Nittany Lions joined the Big Ten in 1993. But certainly Penn State has hurt the Buckeyes on occasion, of course, 2016 being the one. But as you look at the series across the Big Ten, Wisconsin has certainly been a thorn in the Buckeyes' side during certain spurts of Barry Alvarez and that Brett Bielema's tenure. Michigan, of course, in the 90s in particular. Michigan State, oh my goodness, twice here just since 2013 have they cost Ohio State a likely national championship win or bid at least. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, that is a tremendous question, and this kind of relates back to Julian Fleming, the player from Pennsylvania who just picked Ohio State, and without really saying it, he kind of just said, well, Ohio State's been dominant, and in the Urban Meyer era, I'll do the infomercial, he was 7-0 against Michigan, he was 6-1 against Penn State, and he was 5-2 against Michigan State, their top three rivals in the Eastern Division. Now, obviously, it wasn't an Eastern Division until 14 may have been the first year they went to the East-West. I'm not sure. Maybe it was 13. I don't know. But at any rate, I think it was 14 because they played Michigan
They were
State.
still legends and leaders.
Yeah, in the championship game in 13. So you add it together. What is that? 18-3 against your top three rivals. And we had been conditioned to believe this was how it was going to be, because when he was at Bowling Green, he dominated Toledo. When he was at BYU, he dominated Utah, or vice versa. Utah, he dominated BYU. When he was at Florida, they dominated Florida State. They dominated Tennessee. They dominated Georgia. And then when he got here, he dominated all the rivals as well. So that in a nutshell kind of explains it. I just jotted down, and I'll just run through these 8 or 10 games really quickly, just off the top of my head from the last 25 years. And this doesn't even go back to my childhood, I suppose, when they would occasionally pop off a big win like Illinois in 1984 with Keith Byers when he rushed for over 250 yards.
Lost his shoe.
Lost his shoe. They were down, I believe, 24 to nothing, I think, in the first half. The year later, they beat the number 1 team, Iowa, with Chuck Long and Hayden Fry in Columbus. I want to say like 22-13 or something like that.
22-13 in the rain.
Yeah, in the pouring down rain. So there were some good victories in that time. You remember the Earl game in '87 where they carried him off the field and they were wearing the Earl headbands after he'd been fired. But really, if I had to do a top down for the last 25 years, I'd say Miami in '02, the one that she referenced. Never has a game that had the championship pending been that good. Now, obviously, the Texas USC game a few years later was pretty good too, and we've had obviously some good championship games in recent years. Alabama was a transformational win, I think, just from a psychological standpoint, that the Big Ten is every bit as good as the SEC. Just put them out on the field, and
to the heart of the South, brother.
They took their fist and punched the bully right in the jaw. The bully didn't have an answer for it, so that was as good as anything. Oregon, kind of almost an anticlimax. I think the joke that it had was ESPN sent Mark May home from Fort Worth because his opinion was not relevant nor needed. Because everybody knew, to put him on the air and to make some comment that he thinks Oregon was going to beat Ohio State, everybody would have laughed him out of the place. And that was probably, but to win a national championship doesn't get any better than that. Michigan in '06, 1 versus 2, but the winner didn't go anywhere. They went and got drubbed by Florida. Michigan in '16, to win that game, they got into the playoff as a result of it, but lost to Clemson, so it didn't matter. Now, going way back, Arizona State, 1997, the Rose Bowl, Joe Germain, David Boston, that was fabulous. Purdue in '02. Yeah, beating Jake the Snake. Purdue in '02, that holy Buckeye thing, like you guys were talking about, Craig Krenzel to Michael Jenkins was fabulous. Beating Oregon in the Rose Bowl was pretty good. I think Oregon may have been favored with Jeremiah Masoli at quarterback to beat Ohio State. And then the Meyer years, just any number of games. But when his first year, they go undefeated, but they were almost derailed at home by Purdue. And Kenny Guyton had to come off the bench when Miller was hurt, and led him to the victory in overtime. 2 overtime win at Penn State in 2014. Joey Bosa had the walk-off sack, which was remarkable. Michigan State, the game up there, they made the comment that Michigan State's secondary was the no-fly zone, and after Ohio State hung 49 on them, Evan Spencer said, well, we can fly wherever the hell we want. So there you go. They beat Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten championship game, and Wisconsin was favored because Barrett had gone down with the injury the week before. You'll never see anything like that ever again. And then these Penn State games the last 2 years, it really, they lost the game at 16, but it's decided by 3 points. And I believe Ohio State's won the last 2 by 1 point, and they've both been wild. And then to hang 62 on the University of Michigan, they asked Urban Meyer which game meant the most to him, And he said that was at or near the top because it was his last game at Ohio Stadium. And to play almost a near perfect game, maybe not defensively, but offensively against one of the nation's best defenses, at least on paper. They'd held Penn State to 7 points. I don't think Michigan State even got to first base against them. So, yeah, it was that was something. So, yeah, those are a lot of the ones I think of.
You picked some doozies. And I feel like my buddy Jack Clark is worried about his job after all those stats being spit. I'm telling him you're gunning for him.
Now, Jack is the master. Jack Park, the historian, has written the Ohio State Encyclopedia and
twice.
Yeah, twice, and so many other great contributions. He's the man.
He is.
Steve, if I'm not mistaken, was Ohio State was not only the underdog in the Rose Bowl game against Oregon, but in the national championship game, they were a 5-point underdog in that game against the Ducks.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think it was just hesitancy about Cardale Jones, and he didn't play particularly well against Oregon. But once Oregon had led, I think moved it right down and scored to start the game. After that point, Ohio State's defense just kind of slammed the car door on their head, I think, after that, and made it just a miserable day for the Heisman Trophy winner. Marcus Mariota. I mean, I was down on the field, and Joey Bosa just drove him into the carpet in the fourth quarter. And he looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there as they were trying to mount some kind of a last-ditch comeback. And for Zeke to finish it off the way he did, I think a touchdown at the end. And he comes over and flexes with LeBron James. And, it was some great times, no doubt about it.
That Michigan win in 2016, the first time it goes to overtime in the history of the rivalry. Yes. That was pretty amazing. Watching Curtis Samuel take that leap, I think forever, and that's indelible in my memory.
Yeah, and the play right before that obviously was the fourth down play from the 25-yard or whatever. They were 4th and 2, whatever, like the 16 or 17-yard line. And I was in the press conference room because I knew that the fans would storm the field, and I wanted to be where my destination was. And I could watch it on television and not get hung up and whatever. Well, they had the house camera from the 50-yard line staring down at it. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, this wasn't the TV broadcast, but what they put on the screen. And when I looked at it, like, he didn't get it. Well, it was the angle. Obviously, when ABC had the angle down the 20-yard line, or the 15-yard line, you could see he reached across the yard line with the football by an inch or whatever or two, and got that first down. They reviewed it for what time stood still, I think there. Somebody was bitterly disappointed by the outcome, but that was just the start of it.
I was down there on the field level, but I was shooting for a game day, but we were doing a special documentary with a 360 camera. So the camera lens is about as big as a pumpkin, and it's on this tripod.
Wow.
We're on the Michigan bench side, and I'm, 5'6" on my best and tallest day. And obviously everyone on the Michigan sideline is like a 6'5", 3 bills. So I am trying to peer through bodies and legs like I'm a child waiting for Santa, watching for this first down to happen. And as soon as it happens, we had to grab this giant 360 camera. And then obviously after Curtis, the leap into the end zone, we had to scoop everything up, and we were stuck because, again, we were down there. Everyone rushed the field, and I was right in the middle of it. But we all lifted up. My weightlifting came in handy. We lifted up this 360 camera, and you can actually go see this if you have a VR headset. That game, it was filmed by us in virtual reality with the 360 camera.
Wow.
So you can plant yourself into this experience. And if you look around enough, you might see a Claire, but they're definitely, it's a really cool way to experience the game. It's called Jaunt, Jaunt. If anyone out there likes VR and wants to see it, you can actually search for it through any of your gaming systems. For game day, it'll say Game Day Ohio State, Michigan 2016. And there's some really cool documentary footage to go along with it as well.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. That's why I have you two on here. So,
Well,
Steve,
we've
I'm
seen a
not.
few things. We've seen a few things, that's for sure.
You certainly have. You certainly have. I'm not going to be quite as buttoned up with my numbers, but I believe as I go through the Urban Meyer era, the other amazing statistic is that I believe he was undefeated as an underdog.
That may be. That may well be. As a point spread underdog, I don't think they ever lost a game. Now,
2012, they
yeah.
were a 1 or 2 point underdog at Michigan State. They were a 1 or 2 point underdog at Wisconsin. Of course, they went undefeated that year. 2013, they were a favorite against Michigan State. They were a favorite against Clemson, the 2 losses. 2014, underdog at Michigan State, the game that you referenced where they scored 49 and JT Barrett really lit up the skies in that game. They were an underdog against Wisconsin, as you mentioned, by 4 points. Alabama, they were a 10-point underdog against the Tide, 5-point underdog against Oregon in the championship game. That's 6-0 right there. And against Michigan, of course, last year they were an underdog, about a 4-point underdog against Michigan. I don't know that they were an underdog, but the one game that they were an underdog in that I just thought was inexplicable was the big Zeke Elliott game at the Big House in 2015. After they had the downer against Michigan State at home, they came in like a 2 or 3 point dog at Michigan as well. So I don't believe that they lost a game as an underdog under Urban Meyer.
I don't think they did. I mean, you can even look at the losses. Like last 2 years, they would have been favored at home against Oklahoma, favored on the road at Iowa, and favored on the road at Purdue. I mean, they were favored at Iowa by 27 points or something and got killed. Favored by 14 or 15 points last year at Purdue and got killed. So, yeah, it's ugly.
Let's just hope. So the analyst in me is digging into that, and hopefully that culture of being an underdog and overcoming that, and we touched on it a little bit last week, is pervasive through this team. Let's hope that attitude really kind of keeps going, because Ohio State is going to be the dog a couple times this year, according to the media, and I truly believe that mindset is the healthiest way to breed success within a program. These athletes are hungry, and I would love to see them play like they have something to prove.
I can march us through a couple dozen games from the 90s. I'm gonna go way back real quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go way back because my first 3 Ohio State Michigan games were dismal. Not only did the Buckeyes not win, they didn't score a touchdown in 1976, 77, and 78 in Woody Hayes' final 3 games against the team up north. And in 1979, Ohio State took an unranked team early in the season under, of course, Earl Bruce in his inaugural season at Ohio State, won 11 straight games, including going to Michigan, blocking a punt with about 10 or 12 minutes left in the game. Art Schlichter throwing a touchdown pass to Charles Hunter, and they beat Michigan 18-15 to go to the Rose Bowl and take on USC. A couple of years later, in 1981, it was a very beleaguered Ohio State team that lost 3 games, but still had a chance to share the Big Ten championship the final week of the season at Michigan as a double-digit underdog. They went up there in like 12-degree weather, snow stacks all over, pushed aside by the diggers and the tractors to the sideline. So when Art Schlichter scored what was the game-winning touchdown with about 2 minutes left in the game on a scramble in which he escaped about 3 Michigan defenders, he was pushed and he made it inside the pylon, and he just was slammed into a snow stack against the Michigan sideline. And the Buckeyes won that game 14-9. It was, again, an ugly season in which they lost to Minnesota that year. They lost to Stanford that year. And lost 3 games, lost to a Florida State team that they were a big favorite against in Columbus when Art Schlichter at the time, actually, this record stood until Dwayne Haskins broke it this past season, had the passing record of a single season passing record of 458 yards against Florida State in a losing effort. So those games come to mind. The next year against Michigan at home in Columbus, they were an underdog, and Tim Spencer had a huge game. They won 24-14 in the rain. And then, of course, I won't talk about 1986 because that team was really good, and they should have won that game and made the field goal with Matt France missing from 45 yards. We're talking wins. Steve alluded to the 87 game, Earl on the headband. And that team was a top 5 team at the beginning of the season and lost so many just inexplicable, gut-wrenching losses. Iowa in the last few seconds and other games down the stretch. And then they come back and beat Michigan as Earl Bruce was fired just days earlier. Interesting one that they played, and I'll just mention one more because I could keep going. In 1988 was John Cooper's first season. They lost 6 games. They went 4-6-1. They were just blown out by a Pitt team, 42-10. They come back home against an LSU team that was ranked in the top 5 in the country. They were down 33-20 with about 5 minutes left in that game, and Greg Fry led them down the field twice in the final 5 minutes, hit Bobby Olive with just seconds left in the game to win 36-33 over LSU. And one more off the hands of Greg Fry was the next season. They took on Minnesota at the Metrodome. Later that day, I went to a party, and I had my full Ohio State gear on this party, and I got stopped at the door by a few people that heckled me, that talked just trash in my face. They were like, Ohio State sucks. The reason was they gave up on the Buckeyes, losing 31-0 at the Metrodome against Minnesota late second quarter, came back and won 45-38. Greg Fry just put up huge numbers, and they came back down 31-0 in that game. And I will stop right there.
I lived through all of that. I was at a lot of those home games you mentioned, and watched that 89 game with some friends of mine. Remember exactly where I was. That would have been, 30 years ago this fall. So would you believe that I'm already planning 5th anniversary stories on winning the national championship 5 years ago? So time flies when we're having fun. And I don't know. We're sitting here just a few months out, and the days and the weeks are passing very quickly. It's going to be time for the season before we know it.
I pride myself in remembering scores. There was a time I could remember every Ohio State score since I
can't remember them as much from last year as I can from 1995 for some reason. I remember that stuff.
And I knew when I mentioned
my brain for new scores.
I knew when I mentioned 45-38 against Minnesota that wasn't quite right what I was going with it, and I was corrected here. 41-37 was the final. I think it was actually 44-41. Anyway, they won the game. That's all that matters. I'll not be the nerd in me. I'll try to keep that suppressed and go with these exact
Hubert
scores.
H. Humphrey Metrodome, which honestly, we would go there to cover the games, and having covered so many games in outdoor stadiums, I don't know if I'd ever been to cover a game at a dome before when I went there. And I loved it just because we had an open air press box because it was all inside, and you could hear the whole stadium. And
Super Bowl was there.
The Super Bowl had been played. Yeah, the Super Bowl had been played there. The Vikings had played there for years. The Twins had played in the World Series there. So that building had a lot of history, even if it wasn't, necessarily the greatest thing. I think the lack of suites was what probably eventually led them to tear it down. Otherwise, it'd probably still be standing if they could have retrofitted it for what they needed for the modern professional game. But, to me, I enjoyed going there. It was a change of pace. Other people were like, "Oh, this," but when they would have 50,000 people in there, it would get loud. I mean, it was, there were times when Minnesota had competitive football, and obviously Coach Fleck, they had a pretty good season last year. So we'll see. The Buckeyes, that's not their concern though this year.
One of their best teams was because. I got to credit the coach because he certainly stepped on the campus of a number of programs and instantly turned them around, and that's Lou Holtz went to Minnesota, and they suddenly went from doormat in the Big Ten to contender, and they played
With the
against
help of a
team
few
against.
barbers.
What's that, Claire?
And with the help of a few barbers.
A few barbers, yes, a few barbers, absolutely. This particular team in 1985 hosted Ohio State at the Metrodome, and the Buckeyes should have gone to the Rose Bowl that year, lost to the team up north at the end of the year, and were knocked out of the running for the Rose Bowl. And that Iowa team that Steve referenced went on to the Rose Bowl and was Big Ten fodder for UCLA. But anyway, Lou Holtz worked that team up into a frenzy in the crowd, and we hadn't seen a scene like that at the Metrodome. But he had Rose Bowl patches placed on the shoulder pads of all of his players for that matchup against Ohio State, and the Buckeyes did survive, I believe, like 23-19, but a very close game at the Metrodome in front of a frenzied crowd. Lou Holtz brought that program to life temporarily.
No doubt.
All
That's part
right,
of my childhood as well.
good stuff. Buckeye lore doesn't get any better than that from Buckeye Claire Crawford. Steve Hellwagon. Join him on Bucknuts as he joins us each and every week. We will do it once again, everyone, next Wednesday night.
Thank you again for having us on.
Yep.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. See you soon.